This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. Section 1. You will hear a conversation between a university student named Ryan and an accommodation officer named Ms. Brennan. Ryan is calling to inquire about transferring to a different room. You have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good morning, accommodation office. Ms. Brennan speaking.
Oh, good morning. My name's Ryan Gallagher. I'm a first-year student in Block C, and I was hoping to speak to someone about possibly moving to a different room.
Of course, Ryan. Let me bring up your file. Could you spell your surname for me? And which room are you currently in?
Gallagher Gallagher. And I'm in Block C, room 14.
Room 14, yes. And what's prompting you to request a transfer?
It's mainly the noise, to be honest. My room faces the main road, and the traffic noise from the road is really affecting my sleep and my ability to concentrate. It's been a problem since I moved in.
I completely understand. We do get quite a few transfer requests from students in the road-facing rooms. So you're looking for something quieter and away from that side of the building?
Yes, exactly. I was hoping to move to Block E if possible. I've heard the rooms there are much quieter.
Block E is a popular choice for that reason. Let me check what's available. Yes, we do have availability in Block E. Now, before I go through the options, I should let you know there's a standard room transfer processing fee of £25.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Now, I had a look online and I was quite interested in room E7. Is that one available? If it's not, what else is available?
Let me check. E7, no. I'm afraid that one isn't available at the moment. It's actually been reserved for postgraduate students only. We have a standard room on the 2nd floor, E12, and there are also en-suite rooms available on the 3rd floor. The en-suites are lovely, but I should mention they do come at an additional cost, £30 per week on top of your current rate.
£30 extra a week. That might be a stretch for me right now. I think I'll stick with the standard room for now. E12 sounds fine.
Absolutely. E12 is a good room, very quiet. Now, one thing to flag, standard rooms in Block E don't have a wired Ethernet connection. Internet access is via the campus Wi-Fi. Some students do find the signal perfectly adequate, but if you need a faster connection for your studies, you can pay for an upgraded broadband package.
To be honest, I mostly use the Wi-Fi in the common room anyway when I need a strong connection, so I think I'll be fine without upgrading.
Perfect. That's straightforward then. Now, in terms of timing, your transfer request will go through to the room allocation team. It normally takes 3 to 5 working days to process, and you'll get a confirmation email once it's approved.
3 to 5 working days. Okay, that's not too bad.
Once you receive that confirmation, you'll have 48 hours to arrange your move. Now, to officially submit the request, I'll need you to send an email to the accommodation office with your student ID number. That's how we match the request to your file in the system.
Right. So just send an email with my student ID number?
Exactly. The email address is on the university website. Just search for accommodation office. And don't forget to include your current room number as well.
Will do. Thank you so much, Ms. Brennan. Really helpful.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to Section 2. You will hear a recorded introduction delivered by Rachel, a cycling tour guide for the Millbrook City Cycling Tour. She gives participants essential information about the route and what to expect. You have some time to read question 11 to 15.
Hello and welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Millbrook City Cycling Tour. My name is Rachel and I'll be your lead guide today. Before we set off, I just want to run through a few key points so you know exactly what to expect. Today's route is a circular tour of the city, taking in some of Millbrook's most historic and scenic locations. The total distance is approximately 18 kilometers, which for most riders takes between 2 and 2.5 hours at a comfortable pace. It's not a race. Please do ride at whatever speed suits you best. A quick reminder about safety. It is a strict requirement that all participants wear a helmet at all times during the tour. If you haven't brought one, we do have spare helmets at the depot which you can borrow free of charge. Please don't be tempted to remove your helmet at any point. It's a rule we enforce for everyone's safety. We'll be making a scheduled stop roughly halfway around the route, at the Riverside Cafe, which overlooks the river and is a lovely spot to rest and take in a view. We'll have a 30-minute break there, so you'll have time to grab a drink, use the facilities, and take some photographs before we continue. In terms of group management, I will be at the front of the group, and my colleague Tom will be at the rear on his own bike. If for any reason you fall more than 15 minutes behind the rest of the group, Tom will stay with you and our support vehicle will be called to collect you. There's absolutely no shame in that. The terrain includes a couple of steeper stretches, so don't push yourself beyond your limits. Finally, at the end of the tour, back at the depot, every participant receives a complimentary water bottle and a route map to keep as a souvenir. The route map includes points of interest and QR codes linking to more information about each landmark.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now let me walk you through the key stops on the route, which you should be able to follow on the map in front of you. We start and finish right here, and on your map is the Cycle Hire Depot where you picked up your bikes this morning. Make a note of where it is because this is also where we end the tour. From the depot, we head north and almost immediately join the canal towpath. This is one of the most peaceful stretches of the route. You're riding alongside the historic canal with no road traffic. The point where we join the towpath, on your map, is marked as the canal towpath start. Keep an eye out for narrowboats as we ride along. After the canal section, we loop round toward the city center, Millbrook Castle. The castle is one of the oldest Norman structures in this part of the country and the views from the outer walls are spectacular. We'll pause briefly here for photographs before continuing. From the castle, we head east into the park area in the top right of your map. Victoria Park, a beautiful Victorian-era green space with ornamental gardens. This is actually where we'll stop for lunch if the weather is good, and it's a popular spot for locals too. And finally, we begin heading back south toward the depot. We cross the Old Town Bridge, one of Millbrook's most photographed landmarks. The bridge dates from the 14th century and gives you a wonderful view up and down the river. I'll make sure we slow down so you can take it all in. Right, any questions before we set off? No. Brilliant. Let's go.
Turn to Section 3. You will hear two postgraduate students, Nina and Sam, discussing their seminar paper on AI ethics with their tutor, Dr. Osei. Listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 30. You now have 30 seconds to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Right, Nina, Sam. I've read through the draft carefully. Structurally, it's solid. and your engagement with the secondary literature is impressive. But I want to flag a core issue. Throughout the paper, you discuss the need for regulation of AI systems in quite broad terms, but you don't actually propose any specific solutions. You identify the problem well, but then stop short of telling the reader what should actually be done. That's the central weakness I'd like you to address.
That's fair. We were concerned about overstepping into policy prescription when our expertise is more on the ethical analysis side. But I can see how that leaves the paper feeling incomplete.
Exactly. Now, Nina, your section on algorithmic bias is one of the strongest parts. You identify several forms of bias, but which do you consider most dangerous?
For me, it's bias that's embedded in training data and goes completely undetected. At least with overt manipulation, there's a responsible party you can point to. But when bias enters the system through historical data that reflects past discrimination in hiring, lending, criminal justice, the model simply learns and perpetuates those patterns without anyone necessarily intending it. It's insidious because it's invisible and often laundered by the appearance of objectivity.
Well put. Sam, tell me about how you've positioned this paper relative to existing literature.
Most papers we found in the literature focus either on the technical side, how to detect or mitigate bias mathematically, or on pure legal analysis of liability. What we've tried to do is treat both the legal and ethical dimensions simultaneously, showing how they interact. You can't have an effective legal framework without a clear ethical foundation, and vice versa. We think that integrated approach is genuinely novel.
I agree, and that's a real strength. One addition I'd strongly recommend is incorporating the EUAI Act. I know you've mentioned it briefly in a footnote, but it deserves more attention. It's the most developed example of AI regulation actually being applied in a real legislative context. It provides a concrete case against which you can test your theoretical arguments. It's not just decoration. It would actively strengthen your framework.
We'll expand that section. I've been reading more about the risk-tiering approach in the Act that could map quite well onto our ethical categories.
Precisely. Sam, what's your plan before submission?
I'm going to write a new section specifically addressing counter-arguments, particularly the libertarian position that regulation stifles innovation. We acknowledge that view exists, but we don't really engage with it, and I think we need to. A paper that doesn't wrestle with the strongest objection to its position isn't as convincing as one that does.
That's exactly the right instinct. Good. Let me ask you about your core.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Let's pick this up in 2 weeks. Before you go, let me ask you both about your central argument. You're essentially saying that the solution to urban housing is building upward rather than outward. Can you summarize that position clearly?
Yes. Our core argument is that we need to prioritize high-density development over low-rise suburban expansion. The land simply isn't there on the outskirts of major cities for the number of homes needed, and the environmental cost of continuing to expand outward is too high. Density, done well, is the more sustainable path.
And the main source of resident dissatisfaction in your case study.
Consistently, when we looked at survey data from Brickfield's residents, the number one complaint was transport infrastructure, specifically the lack of it in the early years. Buses were infrequent, cycling routes hadn't been completed, and the local tube station was overcrowded. People felt physically cut off despite technically being in the city. Adequate transport infrastructure was by far the most frequently cited grievance.
That's a well-evidenced finding. And in terms of policy, what's the gap your report is trying to highlight?
We argue that the weakest link is national planning policy. Local councils often want to build affordably, but national planning policy doesn't do enough to mandate affordability requirements on developers. We want to show how national planning policy directly affects whether these developments remain affordable long-term or get gentrified.
Good. Now, a couple of specific proposals I want to get your views on for the recommendation section. James, what's your position on mandating green roofs on all new city center buildings?
I'm completely in favor. The evidence on green roofs for insulation, biodiversity, and urban cooling is very strong. I think it should be a non-negotiable planning requirement, and I'd like to recommend it clearly in the report.
And on rent control as a mechanism for tackling urban affordability, what's your view? I'll be honest, I have reservations about that one. The economic literature is genuinely divided. Some studies suggest rent control preserves affordability for existing tenants, but reduces the overall housing supply long-term, which ultimately makes affordability worse. I don't think the evidence is strong enough yet to make a clear recommendation either way. I'd be cautious about including it without a much more thorough analysis.
We'll flag it as a contested area rather than a recommendation then.
That's probably the wisest approach. Right. Good work, both of you. See you in a fortnight.
That is the end of Section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to Section 4. You will hear an academic lecture by Professor Marcus Webb on the psychology and cognitive science of human decision-making. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning. Today I want to take you through some of the most important findings from behavioral psychology and cognitive science on how humans actually make decisions, as opposed to how economists traditionally assumed we do. The starting point is what's known as dual process theory. The idea is that human cognition operates through two distinct systems. System 1 is fast, automatic, intuitive. It's the thinking you do without really thinking. System 2 is slower, deliberate, and analytical. It requires conscious effort and concentration. Most of our everyday decisions are made by System 1, which works well most of the time but is prone to systematic errors that are predictable and that researchers have catalogued in considerable detail. This framework was developed and popularized primarily by the psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2002 and later wrote the influential book Thinking, Fast and Slow, which brought these ideas to a mainstream audience. Let me take you through some of the key biases that emerge from our reliance on System 1. The first is anchoring. When we encounter a number, any number, it acts as an anchor that influences all our subsequent numerical estimates, even when that initial number is completely arbitrary. If I tell you a jacket costs £500 and then tell you it's on sale for £300, you feel you're getting a bargain, even if £300 is still overpriced. The anchor distorts perception. Related to this is the availability heuristic. When we try to assess the probability or frequency of something, say, the likelihood of a plane crash or of being a victim of violent crime, we rely on how easily an example comes to mind. If dramatic aeroplane accidents are frequently reported in the news, they feel more common than they actually are. This is why media coverage of rare but dramatic events distorts public risk perceptions so powerfully. The sunk cost fallacy is another pervasive error. This is the tendency to continue investing in a failing project, relationship, or course of action because of the time, money, or effort already invested, resources that are gone regardless of what you decide next. Rational decision theory says you should ignore sunk costs entirely and evaluate only future costs and benefits. Humans almost never do this naturally. Closely related to the sunk cost fallacy is loss aversion, one of Kahneman's most important findings. Research consistently shows that the psychological pain of losing something is approximately twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something of equivalent value. This asymmetry explains a great deal of apparently irrational economic behavior, why people hold on to failing investments, why they refuse fair gambles, why they respond so strongly to negative framing. Speaking of framing, the framing effect describes the finding that the same information, presented in different ways, consistently leads to different decisions. Telling patients that a surgical procedure has a 90% survival rate produces very different responses than telling them it has a 10% mortality rate, even though these are identical statements. The way a choice is framed shapes the choice itself. This insight led directly to what Thaler and Sunstein called nudge theory. If framing and context shape decisions so powerfully, then deliberately designing the environment in which choices are made, without removing any options, can steer people toward better outcomes. Changing the architecture of choices, as it's sometimes called, is now widely used. Opt-out rather than opt-in organ donation schemes, placing healthy food at eye level in canteens, pre-filling pension contribution defaults, these are all nudges. Finally, the overconfidence effect. Study after study shows that people consistently overestimate the accuracy of their own judgments, from predicting exam results to forecasting business outcomes. Experts are not immune. In fact, in certain domains, expertise can increase overconfidence. This has profound implications for medicine, law, and financial decision-making. The practical consequence of all this research is that it has been used to fundamentally redesign choice environments, particularly in hospitals, where default protocols, checklist systems, and decision aids have been shown to reduce medical errors significantly, and in government services, where behavioral insights teams now routinely apply these principles to policy design. Thank you. We'll continue next week with a look at group decision-making and the dynamics of groupthink.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
That is the end of the listening test. Check your answers. Comment your score. All the best, my dear fellow student. Your hard work will pay off one day.